The rain came down in sheets over the capital city of Ethelgard, a relentless, weeping curtain that turned the cobblestone streets into rivers of mud and filth. It was the kind of rain that seeped into the bones, a chill that no fire could chase away. For Alara Vance, it was the only witness to her final journey. She had been dragged through the muck like a sack of refuse, her once pristine silk gown now a tattered, mud-soaked rag that clung to her emaciated frame. Her hands were bound behind her back with rough rope that bit into her wrists, drawing blood that mingled with the rain and ran in thin, pink rivulets down her fingers. She could barely lift her head. The weeks of slow poisoning had stolen her strength, turning her muscles to water and her bones to glass. Every step was a monumental effort, her bare feet slipping and sliding on the slick stones. The guards who hauled her forward gave no quarter, their grip iron tight on her arms, their faces masks of cold indifference. They were not men. They were extensions of the will that had condemned her. The Vance estate loomed before her, its familiar spires and turrets silhouetted against the bruised, purple sky. She had grown up within those walls, had known every secret passage and hidden alcove. It had been her sanctuary, her home. Now, it looked like a mausoleum, cold and foreboding, the windows dark and empty as dead eyes. The guards dragged her through the servants' entrance, not worthy of the grand front doors she had once walked through as the lady of the house. The kitchens were quiet, the fires banked low. The scent of herbs and roasted meat, once a comfort, now turned her stomach. They passed through the great hall, its walls lined with the portraits of her ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her, filled with a silent, judgmental pity. She was a failure, a disgrace to the Vance name. They knew it. She knew it. And soon, the entire kingdom would know it too. The heavy oak door to the private study swung open, and Alara was shoved inside. She stumbled and fell, her knees cracking against the cold stone floor. The pain was a distant echo, muffled by the greater agony that had taken root in her soul. She looked up, her vision blurred by rain and tears she refused to shed. Her father, Lord Aldrich Vance, sat behind his grand mahogany desk. He was a man of imposing stature, with a silver-streaked beard and eyes the color of winter slate. He had once looked at her with pride, the apple of his eye, his firstborn daughter. Now his gaze was cold, dismissive, as if she were a piece of garbage that had somehow found its way onto his floor. Beside him stood her younger sister, Lillian. The sight of her sent a fresh wave of poison through Alara's veins. Lillian was the picture of innocence, a vision in a gown of softest lavender, her dark hair intricately braided and threaded with pearls. Her eyes, a doe-like brown, were wide with feigned distress. She clutched a lace handkerchief to her chest, her lips trembling in a perfect imitation of grief. But Alara knew the truth. Lillian had orchestrated every step of her downfall. She had been the one to whisper sweet poison into their father's ear, to plant the false letters, to spread the rumors that had turned the court against her. Lillian had smiled at her over breakfast while slipping drops of nightshade into her tea. Lillian had held her hand and called her sister while driving a knife into her back, and then there was him, Lord Cedric of Ashworth, her husband, the man who had pledged his love and devotion, who had promised to protect her from all the dangers of the world. He stood by the window, his back to the room, his posture rigid and unyielding. The man she had trusted with her heart, her body, her very soul. He had not even bothered to turn around and look at her. Alara Vance, her father's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls. You have been found guilty of treason against the crown, of conspiring with foreign agents to undermine the security of the realm, of poisoning your own husband's mind with lies and sedition. The words washed over her like cold water. She had heard them before, in a dank dungeon cell, while a tribunal of her father's allies had read out the charges. The charges that Lillian had fabricated, the evidence that Lord Cedric had provided. They had orchestrated it all, a perfect, airtight conspiracy that had left her no room to defend herself. "Father," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Her throat was raw from screaming, from begging for mercy that had never come. You know this is a lie. You know, Lillian. Silence. Lord Aldrich slammed his fist on the desk, making the inkwell jump. You dare to accuse your own sister, the one who has wept for you, who has begged for your life to be spared. His eyes blazed with righteous fury, a fury that was entirely misplaced. Your mother would be ashamed to see what you have become. A snake in our bosom, a viper we nurtured with our own hands. The mention of her mother sent a fresh stab of pain through Alara's heart. Her mother, Lady Seraphina, had died 3 years ago, taken by a sudden illness that had struck without warning. But Alara had seen the signs too late. The paleness, the weakness, the subtle confusion. She knew now that it had been poison, a slow, creeping death administered by the very people who now stood in judgment over her. Lillian and her father had killed her mother to clear the path for their schemes. Lillian. Alara breathed, her eyes fixing on her sister's face. You did this. All of it. The letters, the poison mother. You killed her. You killed all of us. A flicker of something dark passed over Lillian's angelic features. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and Alara saw the viper lurking beneath. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of injured innocence. Sister, I don't know what you're talking about. I have loved you, defended you. Even now, I am begging Father to show you mercy. Her voice cracked, and she dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief. I cannot believe you would say such things. It breaks my heart. Lord Cedric finally turned from the window. His face was a mask of cold, unfeeling authority. He was still handsome, devastatingly so, with his sharp jaw and brooding dark eyes. The same eyes that had once gazed at her with adoration, that had whispered promises of forever. Now they held nothing but contempt. Enough of this farce, he said, his voice flat and unemotional. The sentence has been passed. She will be taken to the northern wall and executed for her crimes at dawn. Her body will be left to the crows, a warning to all who would betray the crown. No, Alara whispered, a desperate sob tearing from her throat. Cedric, please. I loved you. I gave you everything. My fortune, my family name, my heart. How could you do this to me? Lord Cedric walked over to her, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. In the dim light of the study, she could see the cold calculation behind his eyes. Love. He repeated, the word dripping with disdain. You were a means to an end, Alara. Your father and I have been planning this for years. Your fortune was the foundation of my new trading empire. And now that it is secured, you are nothing more than a liability. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. But we were married. We made vows. We made a transaction, he corrected, his voice ice. And the transaction is complete. You have served your purpose, and now you will be discarded, like a tool that has outlived its usefulness. He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees as if he had touched something unclean. The gesture was more devastating than any blow. Alara felt something inside her snap, the last fragile thread of hope that had sustained her through the darkness. It was gone. They had taken everything. Her family, her husband, her reputation, her very life. And now they were taking her future. Lillian stepped forward, her face a mask of sorrowful pity. Sister, she said, her voice soft and honeyed, I never wanted it to come to this. If only you had been more careful, more discreet. But you were always so reckless, so naive. You never understood the game we were playing. Alara looked up at her sister, and in that moment, the hatred that blazed in her eyes was so intense that Lillian actually took a step back. You want to see a game, Lillian, Alara hissed, her voice low and venomous. I will haunt you. Every step you take, every breath you draw, I will be there. You will never know peace. You will never feel safe. I will make sure of it. Lillian's mask cracked again, and for a fleeting second, Alara saw fear in her eyes. But then her father stepped forward, his face thunderous. That's enough, he barked. Guards. Take her away. The guards hauled her to her feet, dragging her out of the study and down the long, cold corridor. She fought them, clawing and kicking, screaming until her voice gave out. But they were too strong, and she was too weak. They threw her into a barred cart, the wooden slats rough against her bruised body. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and chill. The stars were coming out, cold and distant, indifferent to her suffering. The journey to the northern wall was a nightmare of jostling pain and freezing cold. She was not given food or water, only a thin, threadbare blanket that did nothing to keep out the bitter wind. Her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind, a maelstrom of regret, anger, and a desperate, burning thirst for justice. She replayed every moment of her life, every kindness she had shown them, every smile she had given, and saw it for what it was, a lie. They had never loved her. They had only used her. The dawn came slowly, a pale, watery light creeping over the horizon. The northern wall loomed before her, a massive structure of gray stone that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the last outpost of the kingdom, a place of exile and execution. The guards dragged her out of the cart and led her to the edge of the wall, where a wooden platform had been erected. The crowd had gathered. Nobles, merchants, commoners, all come to witness the execution of the traitor Vance. Alara scanned the faces, searching for a single glimmer of compassion, of pity. She found none. They stared at her with cold, hungry eyes, eager for the spectacle of her death. Her father was there, his face a mask of stern pride. Lillian stood beside him, her hand over her mouth, playing the role of the grieving sister. And Lord Cedric was at the front of the crowd, his arms crossed, his face impassive. A priest stepped forward, his voice droning on about sin and redemption, about the wages of treason. Alara did not hear him. She was too focused on the crowd, on the faces of the people who had destroyed her. She locked eyes with Lillian, and for a moment, she saw something in her sister's gaze. Not guilt, not remorse, satisfaction. Lillian was enjoying this. She was savoring the moment of Alara's final humiliation. The priest stepped back, and the executioner took his place. He was a large, brutish man with a hood covering his face. He took a step toward Alara, reaching for her neck. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, a scream clawing at her throat. But there was nowhere to go. The wall was behind her, and the drop was hundreds of feet. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, someone, anyone. I didn't do this.
I'm innocent.
Please." The executioner grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. She looked up at the sky, at the pale, gray clouds that scudded across the horizon. A single ray of sunlight broke through, touching her face like a final, fleeting kiss. She thought of her mother, of the gentle smile that had once warmed her heart. She thought of the life she could have had, the love she could have given. And she thought of the vengeance she would never exact. The executioner raised his sword, the blade glinting in the pale light. A voice cut through the silence. "Stop." Alara's heart leaped. She turned her head, straining against the executioner's grip. A figure was pushing through the crowd, a woman in a hooded cloak. The guards moved to intercept her, but she threw back her hood, revealing a face that Alara knew intimately. It was her mother. Lady Seraphina Vance was supposed to be dead. But there she stood, pale and gaunt, her eyes blazing with a fire Alara had never seen. "Let her go," her mother said, her voice ringing with a command that silenced the crowd. "This is a travesty, and I will not stand by and watch it happen." Lord Aldrich's face went white. "Seraphina, but you died. We mourned you." "You mourned the woman I was," Lady Seraphina said, her voice sharp as a whip. "You poisoned me, Aldrich. You, and that viper you call a daughter. But you failed. I survived, and I have been gathering evidence ever since." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lord Cedric's face had gone pale. "This is preposterous," he spat. "Guards, arrest this woman. She is clearly a fraud." "AMI," Lady Seraphina said, producing a roll of parchment from her cloak. "I have letters signed by your own hand, Cedric, detailing the conspiracy. I have testimony from servants who witnessed the poison being administered. I have." But before she could finish, A crossbow bolt whistled through the air and embedded itself in her chest. Lady Seraphina gasped, her eyes widening in shock. The parchment fell from her hands, scattering across the mud. She stumbled forward, reaching for Alara, her lips forming a single word: "Run." Alara screamed. The sound was primal, torn from the depths of her soul. She tried to lunge forward, to reach her mother, but the executioner's grip on her hair was iron-tight. She watched in horror as her mother crumpled to the ground, the light fading from her eyes. The crowd erupted into chaos. Someone had fired the bolt. Someone had killed the only person who could have saved her. Alara's gaze swept across the crowd, searching for the killer. And she saw it, a flash of lavender in the throng, a figure slipping away through the press of bodies. Lillian had killed her mother, just as she had killed everything else Alara had ever loved. The executioner recovered from his shock and raised his sword again. "Enough," he snarled. "The sentence will be carried out." "No!" Alara shrieked, thrashing against him with all her remaining strength. But he was too strong. He shoved her back against the edge of the platform, and for a moment, she balanced on the precipice, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The drop was dizzying, a sheer fall to the rocks below. She looked down at her mother's body, at the lifeless form lying in the mud. She looked at her father, who was watching with cold satisfaction. She looked at Cedric, who had not even flinched at the murder of his wife's mother. And she looked at Lillian, who was standing at the back of the crowd, a faint smile on her lips. "I will have my revenge," Alara hissed, the words a promise, a curse. "You will all burn. I swear it on my mother's soul." Lord Cedric laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "You will be dead in seconds. Your threats are meaningless." But Alara had been holding one last secret weapon. In the chaos, she had managed to slip a small, sharp piece of metal from her sleeve. It was a shard of a broken mirror, the only thing she had salvaged from her chambers before they had taken her away. With a sudden, desperate motion, she twisted in the executioner's grip and drove the shard into his throat. The man gurgled and fell back, his hand flying to his neck. For a moment, Alara was free. She stumbled forward, her eyes fixed on Lillian. She would not die without taking her sister with her. She would not let Lillian win as she lunged, closing the distance between them in a few frantic strides. But Lord Cedric was faster. He stepped in front of Lillian, blocking Alara's path. "You will not touch her," he said coldly. "She is worth 1,000 of you." He shoved her back, and Alara's foot caught on the edge of the platform. She teetered backward, her arms flailing, her eyes wide with shock. And then she was falling, the wind screaming in her ears, the world spinning around her. She hit the rocks below with a sickening crunch. The pain was immense, a fire that consumed her entire body. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to move, but her limbs were shattered, useless. She lay there, broken and dying, her blood pooling around her in a dark, spreading stain. Above her, she could see the faces of the crowd peering over the edge. She could see her father, his expression one of cold satisfaction. She could see Lillian, her smile triumphant. And she could see Cedric, his hand resting on Lillian's shoulder, claiming her as his prize. The last image that burned into Alara's fading consciousness was of Lillian's face, her lips curved into a victorious sneer. "Goodbye, sister," Lillian whispered, her voice carrying down on the wind. "I always knew you wouldn't last." Darkness closed in around Alara, a velvet curtain that swallowed everything. She had lost. They had won. She had been betrayed by everyone she had ever loved, discarded like a broken toy, and left to die alone in the cold. But even as the darkness consumed her, a spark of defiance flickered in the depths of her soul. It was a tiny, stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. She would not stay dead. She would not give them the satisfaction of her oblivion. Somehow, someway, she would find a way back. She would return, and when she did, they would learn what it truly meant to fear. The rain began to fall again, washing the blood from the rocks, washing the evidence of her life away. But Alara's spirit clung to the world, a ghost refusing to fade. And somewhere, in the depths of the void, a voice called out to her. A voice that was ancient and powerful, a voice that spoke of second chances and the price of vengeance. "Rise," the voice said. "Rise and reclaim what was stolen from you. Rise and make them pay." Alara opened her eyes. She was gasping for air, her heart pounding against her ribs. The canopy above her was not the gray, weeping sky of the northern wall. It was a rich, deep blue, the color of a summer sky just before dusk. The sheets beneath her were soft and warm, and the air smelled of lavender and beeswax. She was in a bed, a familiar bed, the bed of her maiden chambers in the Vance estate. She sat up slowly, her hands trembling as they touched her face. Her skin was smooth and unlined, her hair soft and clean. She looked down at her hands, turning them over in the pale moonlight. There were no calluses, no scars, no signs of the endless suffering she had endured. She was young again, whole again. The door creaked open, and a figure slipped in. It was a young woman in a plain servant's dress, carrying a candle. The woman looked up and gasped. "My lady, you're awake. You were having such a terrible nightmare. I tried to wake you, but you wouldn't stir." Alara stared at the servant, her mind racing. She remembered her. This was Mary, her loyal handmaid, the one who had been dismissed on false charges just weeks before the wedding. The one who had been sent away, only to be found dead on the road months later, another victim of Lillian's schemes. "Mary," Alara breathed, her voice hoarse. What day is it?" "It's the 3rd of May, my lady," Mary said, her eyes wide with concern. "The day of the spring festival. Your sister was just here, fussing over your dress. She said you must be well rested for Lord Cedric's visit." Alara's heart stopped. The 3rd of May. The day before Lord Cedric was to officially ask for her hand. The day before her life would begin its slow, agonizing spiral into ruin. She was not dead. She was not in some afterlife. She was back. She had been given a second chance. The memories flooded back, sharp and vivid. The poison, the betrayal, the execution, the fall. Lillian's sneer. Cedric's cold eyes. Her father's indifference. And her mother, her poor, murdered mother, who had died trying to save her. A cold fire ignited in Alara's chest, burning away the remnants of her fear and confusion. It was a fire of pure, crystalline hatred. She had been given a gift, a miracle, a chance to change everything. And she would not waste it. She swung her legs out of bed and crossed to the window. The moon hung low over the gardens, casting silver light on the rose bushes below. She saw a figure moving through the shadows, a woman in a dark cloak. It was Lillian sneaking out to meet someone. The scheming had already begun. Alara's fingers tightened on the windowsill, her knuckles white. "You took everything from me," she whispered into the night. "My family, my life, my future. You killed my mother. You laughed as I died. But I am back now, and I will make you all pay. Every single one of you." The moon dipped behind a cloud, plunging the garden into darkness. A chill wind swept through the room, lifting the curtains and setting the candles flickering. In the shadows, Alara's reflection stared back at her from the dark glass of the window. Her face was young, but her eyes were ancient, filled with a cold, burning fury. She had been given a second chance. And this time, she would not be the naive, trusting girl who had fallen for their lies. This time, she would be the predator. This time, she would be the one holding the sword. The game had begun again. And Alara Vance was determined to win. The first pale fingers of dawn crept through the heavy velvet curtains, painting silver stripes across the stone floor of Alara's chambers. She had not slept. Sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford, a vulnerability that had cost her everything in a life she now understood was nothing more than a dress rehearsal for this second chance. Instead, she had spent the hours before sunrise in quiet, methodical preparation, her mind a fortress of cold calculation. Mary had returned twice during the night, once to stoke the fire and once to check on her mistress. Each time, Alara had feigned a peaceful slumber, her breathing even and measured, while her thoughts churned like a storm-tossed sea. She could not afford to reveal her secret, not even to Mary. Trust was a currency she had spent recklessly in her previous life, and she had been left bankrupt. This time, every coin would be guarded with her life. When the first bell tolled, signaling the start of the day's preparations for the spring festival, Alara rose from her bed with the fluid grace of a woman who had nothing left to fear. She crossed to her vanity, a delicate piece of rosewood inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and studied her reflection in the polished silver mirror. The face that stared back was young, untouched by the ravages of poison and grief. Her skin was luminous, her cheeks flushed with the healthy pink of youth, her golden hair a cascade of silk that fell to her waist. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful. But beauty, she now understood, was a weapon that could cut both ways. Mary entered with a basin of warm water and a stack of fresh linens. "Good morning, my lady," the girl said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I've laid out your gown for the festival. Lady Lillian chose it personally. She said you would look like a spring flower." Alara's lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Did she? Now how thoughtful of Lillian. She turned from the mirror and walked to the bed, where a gown of pale, virginal white lace spread across the coverlet. It was beautiful, all delicate lace and flowing silk, the kind of dress that made a woman look innocent and pure, the kind of dress that made her look like prey. "Fetch me the blue gown," Alara said, her voice calm but firm. "The one with the silver embroidery. My mother gave it to me for my 18th birthday." Mary blinked in surprise. "But my lady, Lady Lillian specifically instructed." "I know what Lillian instructed," Alara cut in, her tone softening just enough to soften the blow. "But this is my day, Mary. I will wear what I choose. Please fetch the blue gown." The handmaid hesitated for only a moment before nodding and hurrying to the wardrobe. Alara watched her go, a small pang of guilt twisting in her chest. Mary was loyal, innocent, and utterly unaware of the viper's nest that surrounded her. Alara would protect her this time. She would protect all of them, even if it meant sacrificing her own soul in the process. The blue gown was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, deep sapphire silk that shimmered like the night sky, embroidered with silver thread in intricate patterns of vines and flowers. It was a dress that commanded attention, that spoke of confidence and power. It was the dress of a woman who knew her worth. Alara slipped into it, the fabric cool and smooth against her skin, and felt a surge of strength flow through her veins. She was no longer the girl in white, the lamb being led to the slaughter. She was a huntress, and tonight, the hunt would begin. Mary helped her with her hair, weaving it into an elaborate crown of braids that framed her face like a halo of spun gold. Alara applied a touch of rouge to her lips and a hint of kohl to her eyes, just enough to enhance her natural beauty without appearing painted. She studied her reflection once more and smiled. It was not a smile of joy, but of grim satisfaction. She looked like a queen. And tonight, she would act like one. The great hall of Vance Manor was a riot of color and sound. Servants in crisp livery moved among the guests, bearing trays of delicate pastries and goblets of spiced wine. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, fresh flowers, and the expensive perfumes of the nobility. Crystal chandeliers blazed with candlelight, casting warm, golden pools across the marble floor. Musicians played a lively tune in the corner, their melodies weaving through the buzz of conversation and laughter. Alara paused at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on the carved oak banister. Below her, the cream of Ethelgard's nobility mingled and preened, their jewels glittering like stars in the candlelight. And there, in the center of the room, stood her family. Her father, Lord Aldrich Vance, was holding court near the fireplace, his broad shoulders clad in a doublet of deep burgundy velvet. He was laughing at something a neighboring lord had said, his face wreathed in the practiced bonhomie of a man who had spent his life cultivating allies. But Alara knew the truth beneath the mask. She knew the cold ambition that lurked behind his warm smiles, the ruthless calculation that had led him to sacrifice his own daughter on the altar of his greed. Lillian stood at his side, a vision of spring in a gown of pale saffron silk that clung to her slender figure like a second skin. Her dark hair was artfully arranged, a cascade of ringlets that framed her delicate features, and her doe-like eyes were wide and luminous. She was the picture of innocent grace, the perfect daughter, the beloved sister. But Alara saw the viper coiling beneath the surface. She saw the triumph that gleamed in Lillian's eyes, the satisfaction of a predator who had already marked her prey. And there, across the room, stood Lord Cedric of Ashworth. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and brooding intensity. He was speaking with a group of young nobles, his laugh a low, musical rumble that once made Alara's heart flutter. Now it made her skin crawl. She remembered the way he had looked at her as she lay dying, the cold indifference in his eyes. She remembered his voice, flat and unemotional, telling her that she had been nothing more than a transaction. A fire kindled in her chest, hot and fierce. But she banked it, smoothing her expression into a mask of serene composure. This was not the time for anger. This was the time for strategy. She descended the stairs, her head held high, her movements deliberate and graceful. The conversation in the great hall faltered as heads turned to watch her. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing, admiring, calculating. She was the eldest daughter of House Vance, the heiress to a fortune that had once made her the most eligible bride in the kingdom. And tonight, she intended to remind them of exactly who they were dealing with. Lillian was the first to approach, her smile wide and welcoming. "Alara," she exclaimed, her voice pitched to carry. "You look absolutely radiant. That dress is stunning." Her eyes flickered over the sapphire silk, and for a fraction of a second, Alara saw the flash of irritation beneath the warmth. Lillian had not chosen this gown. Lillian had wanted her in white, passive and easily overlooked. "I thought it was time for a change," Alara said, her voice smooth as honey. "One must evolve with the seasons, don't you think?" She leaned in, pressing a kiss to Lillian's cheek, and whispered, so softly that only her sister could hear, "I know what you did, Lillian. All of it. And I will make you pay." Lillian's smile faltered. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face pale and pinched. For a moment, she looked almost afraid. But then she recovered, her mask firmly in place. "I don't know what you're talking about, sister," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Perhaps the excitement of the day has addled your mind." "Perhaps it has," Alara agreed, her smile never wavering. "We shall see." She moved away, leaving Lillian standing frozen in the middle of the room. The first strike had been delivered. The first seed of doubt had been planted. And Alara felt a surge of dark, exhilarating satisfaction. Lord Cedric approached her next, his expression one of practiced charm. He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his lips lingering just a moment too long. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "You are the very sun of this festival. I have been counting the days until I could see you again." Alara looked at him, her eyes cool and assessing. She remembered the way he had held her, the promises he had made, the devotion he had sworn. All lies, all carefully calculated to manipulate her trust. "Lord Cedric," she replied, her voice neutral. "You are too kind. I trust you have been well." "Well enough," he said, his eyes searching her face. "But I confess, my thoughts have been consumed with you. There is something I wish to discuss with you, something of great importance. Perhaps we could find a moment of privacy tonight." Alara's heart quickened. In her previous life, this was the moment he had asked for her hand, and she had accepted with tears of joy. She had been so blind, so desperately naive. "I think that would be unwise, my lord," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The eyes of the court are upon us. Anything of importance can be said in the presence of my father and my sister." Lord Cedric's eyes narrowed. He was not accustomed to being denied, and the flicker of annoyance that crossed his face was all the confirmation Alara needed. He had expected her to be pliant, eager. He had expected her to fall into his arms like a ripe fruit. But she was no longer the girl he had once manipulated so easily. "As you wish," he said, stepping back with a stiff bow. "I shall speak with your father later this evening." "I am certain you will," Elara replied, and turned away before he could see the cold triumph in her eyes. The festival continued around her, a whirlwind of music and laughter and carefully crafted lies. Elara moved through it with the ease of a born performer, her smile in place, her laughter soft and musical. But her eyes were always watching, always calculating. She noted the way Lillian hovered near the foreign ambassador, the way her father's gaze constantly drifted to the Grand Duke, the way Lord Cedric whispered to his allies in shadowed corners. They were all players in the same game, and they were all so confident of their victory. She found her mother in the garden, standing alone among the rose bushes, her face pale and drawn. Lady Seraphina Vance was a woman of quiet dignity, her beauty tempered by a lifetime of sorrow. She had always been the heart of the family, the gentle hand that guided and comforted. But she had also been blind, willfully blind to the darkness that lurked beneath her husband's ambition and her younger daughter's scheming. "Mother," Elara said, approaching her with a soft smile. "You look tired. Are you unwell?" Lady Seraphina turned, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her eldest daughter. "Elara, my darling, you look so beautiful tonight. That gown was your grandmother's, you know. It suits you perfectly." She reached out and touched Elara's cheek, her fingers cool and trembling. "I was just thinking about how quickly you've grown. It feels like only yesterday you were a little girl, running through these gardens." Elara's heart ached at the tenderness in her mother's voice. She remembered the last time she had seen her mother alive, the way she had crumpled to the ground with a crossbow bolt in her chest. She remembered the light fading from her eyes, the whispered plea to run. The memory was a blade, sharp and cold, slicing through her carefully constructed armor. "Mother," Elara said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with you. Privately. It's important." Lady Seraphina's brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? My dear, you look so serious." Elara took her mother's hand and led her deeper into the garden, away from the prying eyes of the party. The night air was cool and fragrant, heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. They stopped near a small fountain, its waters glittering in the moonlight like scattered diamonds. "Mother, I need you to listen to me," Elara said, her voice trembling with the weight of her conviction. "I know this will sound mad. I know you will find it difficult to believe. But I need you to trust me. Your life depends on it. My life depends on it." Lady Seraphina's eyes widened with alarm. "Elara, you're frightening me. What is this about?" Elara took a deep breath. She had to be careful. She could not reveal everything, not yet. Her mother's mind was too fragile, too entrenched in the illusion of a happy family. But she could plant the seeds of doubt, nurture them until they grew into a forest of truth. "Father is planning something," Elara said, her voice low and urgent. "Something that will destroy our family. He has made deals with the crown, promises he cannot keep. And Lillian is helping him. She is not the innocent sister you believe her to be. She has been whispering poison in Father's ear, turning him against me. Against you." Lady Seraphina shook her head, her face pale. "That's impossible. Lillian loves you. She speaks of you with such admiration." "Mother, please," Elara begged, her eyes burning with intensity. "I know you want to believe that. I wanted to believe it too. But I have seen things. Heard things. Lillian is not what she seems. And Father would sacrifice us all to advance his own position. He has already sold me to Lord Cedric. And I suspect he would sell you to a quiet grave if it suited his purposes." A gasp escaped Lady Seraphina's lips. "Elara, you cannot say such things. It's treasonous. It's—" "Mother, look at me," Elara said, gripping her mother's hands tightly. "I am not mad. I am not paranoid. I am telling you the truth. I have proof. I have letters, documents, testimony from servants. I will show you everything. But you must be ready to face what I show you. You must be ready to fight." Lady Seraphina's eyes glistened with tears. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and something in Alara's expression must have convinced her. The desperation, the fear, the fierce, protective love that burned in her gaze. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I don't know what to believe. Believe me, Alara said softly. Please, mother, believe me. Lady Seraphina was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. I will try, she said. I will try to see what you see. But Alara, if you are wrong, if this is some misunderstanding, I am not wrong, Alara said, her voice hard as steel. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. A rustle in the bushes made them both freeze. Alara's heart seized with fear. She had been so careful, so focused on her mother, that she had not noticed they were being watched. She turned, her hand reaching for the small dagger she had concealed in her sleeve. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and lean, dressed in dark traveling clothes. The moonlight caught his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of burnished silver. He was young, perhaps a few years older than Alara, and there was an air of authority about him that was both commanding and unsettling. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I mean you no harm, he said, his voice low and smooth. I am merely a messenger. I bring a missive from the Crown Prince. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. The Crown Prince, Prince Kalen, the man who, in her previous life, she had barely met, seeing him only as a distant, unattainable figure. The man who had remained neutral during her trial, neither condemning nor defending her. What could he possibly want with her? The messenger stepped forward, producing a sealed letter from his cloak. The wax bore the royal crest, a golden dragon rampant on a field of crimson. Alara took the letter with trembling hands, breaking the seal with a swift, decisive motion. Her eyes scanned the contents, and her breath caught in her throat. It was an invitation. A private audience with the Crown Prince, to be held at the palace the following day. The letter was brief, formal, but there was an undercurrent of urgency beneath the courtly language. The prince wished to discuss matters of state that he believed only the eldest daughter of House Vance could illuminate. Lady Seraphina peered over her daughter's shoulder, her face a mask of confusion. The Crown Prince, why would he wish to see you? Alara folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. She had no idea what this could mean. Was the prince a friend or an enemy? Was he reaching out to her as an ally? Or was this another trap, another layer of the conspiracy that had doomed her in her first life? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I intend to find out. The messenger bowed and retreated into the shadows, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. Alara stood in the moonlight, the letter clutched in her hand, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The game was changing. The players were moving. And she had just received an invitation to the most dangerous board of all. She looked up at the palace, visible in the distance as a glittering silhouette against the night sky. Somewhere in those opulent halls, the Crown Prince was waiting. And Alara Vance, the daughter who had risen from the ashes of her own death, was determined to meet him. The night was just beginning. And the game was far from over. The royal carriage arrived at the Vance estate precisely at noon, its gilded wheels gleaming in the pale spring sunlight. It was an ostentatious display of power, the kind of thing that reminded every noble in the kingdom exactly where they stood in the great hierarchy of Ethelgard. Alara watched from her window as it rolled through the gates, the Vance crest emblazoned on its doors, flanked by a dozen mounted guards in the crimson and gold of the royal house. She had not slept. Sleep had become a luxury she could no longer afford, a vulnerability that left her exposed to the nightmares that stalked her every waking moment. Instead, she had spent the night in quiet preparation, her mind a fortress of cold calculation. She had gone over every detail of her first life, every conversation, every subtle glance, every whispered word that had been exchanged in the shadows of the court. And she had realized, with a sickening clarity, that she had been blind to so much. The Crown Prince, Kalen, had been a shadow on the periphery of her existence. She had seen him at state functions, had heard the rumors of his brilliance and his ruthlessness. He was the eldest son of King Aldrich, the heir to the throne, a man of power and influence who moved through the court like a predator among prey. In her first life, he had shown her no particular interest, had offered her no protection when her world crumbled around her. She had assumed, naively, that he was indifferent to her fate. But now, as she studied the letter in her hand, she wondered if she had missed something. The invitation was written in a strong, elegant hand, the words carefully chosen, the phrasing deliberately vague. Matters of state was a convenient excuse, a shield to hide the true purpose of the meeting. And the phrase, "Only the eldest daughter of House Vance can illuminate," was a puzzle, a clue that she was determined to solve. Mary helped her into her gown, a deep emerald silk that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. It was a dress of quiet elegance, not ostentatious but unmistakably expensive, the kind of gown that whispered power rather than shouting it. Alara had chosen it deliberately. She did not want to appear as a supplicant, desperate for royal favor. She wanted to appear as an equal, a woman of substance who was worthy of the prince's attention. "You look beautiful, my lady," Mary said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "The prince will be captivated." Alara smiled, a thin, calculated curve of her lips. "I am not seeking to captivate him, Mary. I am seeking to understand him. There is a difference." The carriage ride to the palace was a blur of cobblestone streets and crowded marketplaces. Alara pressed her face to the window, watching the city of Ethelgard unfold around her. It was the city she had grown up in, the city she had been exiled from, the city she had died in. She saw the faces of the people, merchants and beggars, nobles and servants, all going about their lives with no idea of the games being played above them. She envied them their ignorance. The palace rose before her like a mountain of white stone, its spires piercing the sky like the fingers of a giant. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a testament to the power and wealth of the royal house. Alara had been here before, many times, but never as a woman with a purpose. She had come as a guest, a decoration, a pretty face to adorn a noble's arm. Now, she came as a player in a game that was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The guards at the gate checked her credentials with meticulous care, their eyes cold and assessing. They were professionals, loyal to the crown and suspicious of everyone who passed through their domain. Alara met their gazes without flinching, her expression serene and unruffled. She had nothing to hide. Not yet. A steward escorted her through the vast halls of the palace, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the history of the kingdom, scenes of battle and triumph, of alliances forged and enemies vanquished. Alara studied them as she walked, absorbing the stories they told. She was building a mental map of the power dynamics that governed this place, charting the alliances and enmities that would shape her fate. The steward stopped before a pair of towering oak doors, intricately carved with scenes of hunting and feasting. He knocked 3 times, a sharp, deliberate rhythm, and then pushed them open with a grunt of effort. "Lady Alara Vance," he announced, his voice echoing in the chamber beyond. Alara stepped through the doorway and into a world of breathtaking beauty. The room was a study, vast and grand, with walls lined with bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its flames crackling and dancing in the hearth. The furniture was rich and elegant, upholstered in deep burgundy velvet and polished to a gleaming sheen. And at the center of it all, behind a desk of dark mahogany, sat the crown prince. Kalen was not what she had expected. She had seen him from a distance, had heard the whispered descriptions of his cold beauty and his unyielding will. But up close, he was something else entirely. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame that spoke of strength and discipline. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell in waves to his shoulders, framing a face that was all sharp angles and aristocratic grace. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were the color of burnished silver, and they held a depth of intelligence and cunning that made her breath catch. He rose from his desk as she entered, his movements fluid and graceful. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice low and smooth as aged whiskey. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please come in." Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to maintain the composure that was her armor. "Your Highness," she said, executing a perfect curtsy. "I am honored by your summons." The prince gestured to a chair before his desk.
"Please sit.
"I believe we have much to discuss." Alara took the seat, her posture straight and poised. The prince returned to his own chair, his silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was almost unsettling. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged with unspoken questions. "I must confess," Kalen said finally, leaning back in his chair, "I was intrigued by your recent behavior. The whispers that reach my ears speak of a transformation. The shy, retiring Lady Alara has been replaced by someone far more formidable." Alara's heart skipped a beat. He had been watching her. He had noticed her changes. This was both a danger and an opportunity. "I am not sure what you mean, Your Highness," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I am simply enjoying the season as any young woman would." The prince smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. "You are too modest. I have heard of your confrontation with your sister, your refusal to accept Lord Cedric's proposal, your private conversation with your mother. These are not the actions of a young woman simply enjoying the season. These are the actions of a woman who is playing a very dangerous game." Alara's blood ran cold. He knew far too much. His network of spies was clearly extensive, and he had been watching her with an attention that was both flattering and terrifying. She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "If I am playing a game, Your Highness, it is only because the game was forced upon me. I am merely defending myself against those who would see me destroyed." The prince's eyes gleamed with interest. "And who would those be, exactly?" Alara hesitated. She had to be careful. She did not know whose side he was on, whether he was a potential ally or a hidden enemy. But she also knew that she could not afford to be passive. If she wanted his help, she would have to earn his trust. And to earn his trust, she would have to offer something in return. "Your Highness," she said, leaning forward slightly, "I have reason to believe that my father, Lord Aldrich Vance, has been engaged in a conspiracy against the crown. He has been making deals with foreign powers, trading state secrets for personal advancement. And I believe that my sister, Lillian, is his co-conspirator." The prince's expression did not change, but she saw the flicker of interest in his silver eyes. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I am gathering it," Alara said. "But I need more time, and I need protection. My father is a powerful man, and if he suspects that I am working against him, he will not hesitate to destroy me." Kalen was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "And what do you want from me, Lady Alara?" "My protection, my influence, my hand in marriage." The last words were a surprise, a subtle shift in the conversation that caught her off guard. She had not expected him to be so direct. But she was not a naive girl anymore, easily flustered by a handsome face and a suggestive comment. She met his gaze without flinching. "I want your trust," she said. "And I want the opportunity to prove myself worthy of it. I am not asking for your hand, Your Highness. I am asking for your partnership, an alliance between us, forged on the understanding that we both have something to gain." The prince leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled before him. "And what makes you think I need an alliance with a disgraced noble's daughter? What do you have to offer me that I cannot find elsewhere?" Alara smiled, a slow, confident curve of her lips. "I know things, Your Highness. Things about the court, about the nobles, about the secrets that they would kill to protect. I have been underestimated my entire life, and that has given me an advantage. People speak freely in front of me, never suspecting that I am listening. I know about your mother's death, for instance. And I know that you suspect it was not natural." The prince's eyes narrowed, a flash of cold fury flickering in their depths. "That is a dangerous thing to say, Lady Alara. My mother's death was ruled an accident." "Was it?" Alara asked, her voice soft but pointed. I have heard whispers, Your Highness. Whispers that suggest otherwise. I can help you uncover the truth. I have resources, connections, a network of loyal servants that extends throughout the kingdom. Together, we can bring those responsible to justice. The silence that followed was deafening. The prince stared at her, his expression unreadable, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic pattern on the desk. She could feel his mind working, weighing her words, assessing her value. And she knew that she had gambled everything on this moment. Finally, he spoke. You are either the most brilliant woman I have ever met, he said, his voice low and dangerous, or the most foolish. Either way, I am intrigued. Alara's heart leaped with triumph, but she kept her expression calm. I am neither, Your Highness. I am simply a woman who has been given a second chance, and who intends to make the most of it. The prince rose from his chair and walked to the window, his back to her. I have been watching you for a long time, Lady Alara, he said, his voice thoughtful. Longer than you realize. I saw the way your family treated you, the way they dismissed you, the way they used you. I saw the way Lord Cedric looked at you, like a possession to be acquired and discarded. And I knew, even then, that you were destined for something greater. Alara's breath caught. He had been watching her for how long, and why had he not intervened? She rose from her chair, her hands trembling at her sides. If you knew what I was going through, why did you not help me? The prince turned, his silver eyes meeting hers. Because I needed to see what you were made of, he said. I needed to know if you had the strength to survive, the courage to fight. And you have proven yourself, Alara. You have proven yourself in ways that I could never have imagined. He crossed the room and stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. I will help you, he said. I will give you my protection, my influence, my resources. But in return, I require your complete loyalty. I need to know that you are mine and mine alone. Can you give me that? Alara looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of something that she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. She had been alone for so long, fighting battles that no one else could see. And now, here was a man who saw her, who understood her, who was offering her a chance to fight back. She would be a fool to refuse. Yes, she said, her voice steady and firm. I can give you that. The prince smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, softening the hard edges of his aristocratic features. Then we have an alliance, he said. You and I, against the world. Let them come for us. We will be ready. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong against hers. And in that moment, Alara felt a surge of power that was almost intoxicating. She was no longer alone. She had an ally, a powerful ally, one who could help her achieve everything she had ever wanted. But as she left the palace, the carriage carrying her back to the Vance estate, a cold knot of unease settled in her stomach. She had made a deal with the crown prince, a man whose motives she still did not fully understand. She had given him her loyalty, her trust, her secrets. And she had no idea if he would ever truly be hers. The carriage pulled through the gates of the Vance estate, and Alara looked up at the familiar facade of her home. The windows were dark, the garden silent. But she knew that within those walls, a storm was brewing. Her father, her sister, her soon-to-be ex-husband, they were all plotting against her, all planning her downfall. Let them try. She stepped out of the carriage, her head held high, her heart filled with a cold, burning fire. She had an ally now, a powerful ally. And together, they would burn the world of her enemies to ashes. The days that followed Alara's secret audience with the crown prince passed in a blur of calculated movements and carefully constructed masks. She moved through the Vance estate like a ghost, her presence felt but her true purpose hidden beneath layers of practiced serenity. Every smile was measured, every word weighed, every glance a deliberate choice in the intricate dance she was performing. The household had noticed the change in her. The servants whispered among themselves, their voices hushed and curious, wondering what had transformed their once gentle mistress into a woman of steel and ice. Lord Aldrich had watched her with narrowed eyes, his suspicion growing with each passing day, but he could find no fault in her behavior. She was courteous, composed, the perfect lady of the house. And that, Alara knew, was the most damning evidence of Auld Lillian, however, was not so easily fooled. She had always been attuned to the undercurrents of emotion that flowed through the household, her instincts honed by years of manipulation and deceit. She watched Alara with eyes that were too knowing, her smile never quite reaching her gaze. And she had begun to circle, like a predator testing the defenses of its prey. It was late evening when Lillian made her move. The household had retired for the night, the corridors dim and silent save for the soft glow of candlelight. Alara was in her chambers, seated before the mirror, her mind churning with plans and counterplans, when the door swung open without warning. Still awake, Sister Lillian's voice was honeyed silk, smooth and deceptively sweet. She glided into the room, her nightgown a whisper of pale silk that clung to her slender frame. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and in the candlelight, she looked almost angelic. Almost. Alara turned, her expression serene. "Lillian, what a pleasant surprise. I thought you would be resting. The season has been so busy." Lillian smiled, but there was something sharp behind the curve of her lips. "I could not sleep. My thoughts kept returning to you, dear sister. You have been so different lately. So distant. I wondered if something was troubling you." "Troubling me?" Alara laughed, a soft, musical sound that held no warmth. "Not at all. I have simply been reflecting on the past, on how much I have learned, how much I have grown. It is remarkable, really, what clarity can come from adversity." Lillian's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her mask. "Adversity? What adversity have you faced? Alara, you have been sheltered, protected, loved by everyone in this family." "Have I?" Alara rose from her seat and walked to the window, her back to her sister. "I suppose that is one way to see it. Another way would be to recognize that I have been a pawn in a game I did not even know I was playing." "But I know now, Lillian." "I know everything." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Alara could feel Lillian's gaze boring into her back, could sense the calculations running behind those innocent brown eyes. And then Lillian spoke, her voice losing its honeyed edge. "What do you know?" she asked, the question low and dangerous. Alara turned, her smile cold and triumphant. "I know about the letters. The ones you forged, the ones you used to make it look like I was conspiring with foreign agents. I know about the poison you slipped into my tea, the poison that made me weak and sick, that made me vulnerable to your schemes. I know about the night you visited Mother's chambers, the night you slipped the same poison into her wine. And I know that you and Father conspired to have me executed, to clear the way for your own ascension." Lillian's face went white, the blood draining from her cheeks. For a moment, she looked almost frightened, a deer caught in the hunter's sights. But then her expression hardened, and Alara saw the viper emerge from beneath the mask of innocence. "You are mad," Lillian hissed. "These are fantasies, delusions born of jealousy and resentment. I have done nothing but love you, protect you, support you. And this is how you repay me." "Spare me your performance," Alara said, her voice cold as winter ice. "I know what you are, Lillian. I have always known. I simply refuse to see it. But I see it now. I see everything." Lillian took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "And what do you intend to do with your knowledge?" "Go to Father. He will never believe you. Go to the Crown. They will laugh you out of the court. You have no proof, Alara. You have nothing." "Are you certain of that?" Alara asked, reaching into the folds of her gown. She pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its pages worn and yellowed. "I have been keeping a record, Lillian. Every conversation, every meeting, every whispered word. I have the testimony of servants who saw you visit Mother's chambers, who saw you slip something into her wine. I have copies of the letters you forged, the letters you thought you had destroyed. I have everything I need to destroy you." Lillian's composure shattered. Her eyes widened, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. You are lying. That journal is a forgery, a fabrication meant to slander my name. Is it? Alara held up the journal, letting the candlelight catch its worn cover. Perhaps you would like to see for yourself. I have detailed accounts of every conversation we have ever had, every scheme you have ever concocted. It is all here, Lillian. Every single piece of evidence I need to bring you to ruin. For a long, agonizing moment, Lillian stared at the journal, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. And then, to Alara's surprise, she laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound, devoid of any genuine humor. You think you have won, Lillian said, shaking her head slowly. You think you have outmaneuvered me. But you are a fool, Alara. A naive, pathetic fool. Do you really believe that Father will let you expose me? Do you really believe that Lord Cedric will allow you to destroy the woman he loves? Alara's heart clenched at the words, but she kept her expression impassive. Lord Cedric loves you, she asked, her voice flat. He told you that. Lillian's smile was triumphant, a cruel curve of her lips. He told me everything. He told me that he never loved you, that you were simply a means to an end. He told me that once you were disposed of, we would be together, that we would rule the estates and the fortune that was rightfully yours. You were never more than an obstacle, Alara. A minor inconvenience on our path to power. The words were a blade, sharp and cold, slicing through Alara's carefully constructed armor. She had known the truth, had known it from the moment she had regained consciousness in her bed. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing the casual cruelty in Lillian's voice, was a different kind of pain. It was the pain of betrayal, raw and visceral, a wound that would not heal, but Alara had been forged in the fires of that betrayal. She had died, and in dying, she had been reborn. She would not let Lillian's words break her. She would use them as fuel for the fire that burned in her heart. Thank you, Alara said, her voice steady and calm. Thank you for confirming everything I already suspected. You have just made my task so much easier. Lillian's smile faltered. What task? The task of destroying you, Alara replied, stepping forward. You see, I have no intention of going to Father. He is complicit in your schemes, as much a traitor as you are. And Lord Cedric is already a lost cause, a man who sold his soul for power and prestige. No, I intend to go to the Crown Prince. And I intend to give him everything I have. Lillian's face went white. The Crown Prince, what does he have to do with any of this? Everything, Alara said, her voice ringing with triumph. He is my ally, Lillian, my partner in this endeavor. He knows everything, all of it, and he is prepared to act. You and Father and Lord Cedric are all going to face the consequences of your treachery. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both sisters turned, their hearts pounding, as the door swung open to reveal a servant, her face pale and frightened. My ladies, she stammered, forgive the intrusion, but there is a visitor at the gate. He demands to see Lady Alara immediately. Alara's heart leaped. She knew, without being told, who it was. Show him to the study, she instructed, her voice calm and commanding. I will be there shortly. The servant scurried away, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Alara turned to Lillian, a cold smile on her lips. It seems the game has begun, dear sister. I suggest you go to your chambers and prepare yourself. The next few hours will be eventful. Lillian's face was a mask of fury and fear. You will regret this, Alara. You will regret every moment of this night. I swear it. Perhaps, Alara said, her voice soft. But I doubt it. I am done regretting, Lillian. I am done being the victim. From now on, I am the one in control. And you are nothing more than a footnote in my story. She swept past her sister, her gown rustling against the stone floor, and made her way to the study. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing with possibilities. She did not know what the Crown Prince had come to say, did not know what this late-night visit portended. But she knew that whatever happened, she was ready. She pushed open the door to the study and stepped inside. The room was bathed in candlelight, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. And there, standing by the window, was Prince Kalen. He was dressed in dark traveling clothes, his silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. Your Highness, Alara said, curtsying. This is an unexpected honor. The prince turned, his expression unreadable. "I apologize for the hour, Lady Alara. But events have been set in motion that cannot be undone. I needed to speak with you immediately." Alara's blood ran cold. What events would have happened? The prince stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lord Cedric has been arrested," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He was caught in a treasonous correspondence with foreign agents. The evidence was overwhelming. He has confessed to everything." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. Lord Cedric arrested, confessed. It was too good to be true. And yet, there was something in the prince's expression that made her uneasy. Something that did not quite add up. "Your Highness," she said slowly, "how did you come by this evidence?" The prince smiled, a thin, enigmatic curve of his lips. "I have my sources, Lady Alara. Sources that I have cultivated over many years. When I learned of Cedric's treachery, I could not stand idly by. I had to act." Alara's heart was racing now, her instincts screaming at her that something was wrong. "And my father, my sister, what of them?" The prince's smile faded, replaced by a grim resolve. "Your father has fled the city. He was warned, it seems, and escaped before the guards could apprehend him. Your sister is, well, she is in the custody of the royal guard, awaiting questioning. Lillian in custody. Lord Aldrich on the run. Lord Cedric already confessing. It was a victory, a complete and total victory. And yet, Alara could not shake the feeling that she was being played, that there was a piece of this puzzle she was missing. "Your Highness," she said, her voice trembling, "is there something you are not telling me?" The prince looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a strange, unreadable emotion. "There is one more thing," he said. "The evidence that led to Cedric's arrest. It was provided by a source within the court. A source who claimed to have inside knowledge of the conspiracy. A source who was willing to testify against Cedric in exchange for immunity." Alara's blood froze. She knew, with a sickening certainty, who that source was. "Lillian," she breathed. Lillian turned on him. She gave him up to save herself. The prince nodded slowly. "She has offered to provide testimony against your father as well, in exchange for a reduced sentence. She is a survivor, your sister. She will do whatever it takes to save her own skin." Alara felt the world tilt around her. Lillian, the viper who had orchestrated her downfall, was now the key to her victory. Lillian, who had killed her mother, who had poisoned her, who had laughed as she died, was now offering to betray her father to save herself. It was poetic justice in a way, but it was also deeply unsettling. "Your Highness," Alara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "What happens now?" The prince stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. His touch was warm, his eyes intense. "Now," he said softly, "we wait. We watch. And we prepare for the next battle. Because this is not over, Alara. It will never be over. The court is a nest of vipers, and we have only just begun to uncover their secrets." Alara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. She was tired, so tired. But she was also strong, stronger than she had ever been. She had an ally, a purpose, a future. And she was ready to fight for it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." The prince smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. "You do not need to thank me, Alara. We are in this together. You and I, remember that." He released her and stepped back, his expression growing serious. "I must go. There is still much to do, and the night is far from over. But I will see you soon. I promise." He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Alara watched him go, her heart filled with a strange mix of emotions. Hope, fear, longing, determination. She had come so far, and she still had so far to go. But she was not alone. She would never be alone again. The door closed behind him, and Alara was alone in the study. She stood there, her mind racing, her heart pounding, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The game was far from over. But she was ready. She was ready for anything. The sun rose over Ethelgard on the morning of the trials, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Alara stood at the window of her chambers, watching the light creep over the spires of the palace, and felt the weight of everything she had endured settle around her shoulders like a familiar cloak. It was heavy, that weight, but it was no longer a burden. It was armor. It was proof of her survival. Mary had laid out her gown for the day, a deep, unyielding black silk that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It was not a dress of mourning, but of finality. Alara slipped into it with the practiced ease of a woman who had dressed for war, and when she looked at her reflection in the silver mirror, she saw a stranger. Not the naive girl who had once believed in love and loyalty, not the broken woman who had crawled through the mud of the northern wall, but a queen. A woman who had been forged in fire and was ready to claim her throne. She reached for the small, ornate brooch on her vanity, the silver crescent moon that had belonged to her mother. It had been a gift on her 16th birthday, a symbol of the Vance legacy. In her first life, she had worn it to her wedding, to her trial, to her execution. It had been the only thing she had been allowed to keep in her prison cell. She had died wearing it, its cold metal pressed against her heart. Now, it was a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She pinned it to her gown, its weight of familiar comfort, and took a deep breath. Today, the reckoning would come. Today, justice would be served. The great hall of the palace was packed to capacity when Alara arrived. Nobles from every corner of the kingdom had gathered to witness the trials of Lord Aldrich Vance, Lady Lillian Vance, and Lord Cedric of Ashworth. The air was thick with the scent of perfumed bodies and the hum of excited whispers. They had come to see a spectacle, a drama that would be recounted for generations. They had come to see the fall of a great house. Alara walked through the crowd, her head held high, her expression serene. She could feel their eyes on her, their whispers following her like a shadow. The eldest daughter, they murmured. The one who survived. The one who brought them all down. She did not react. She had learned to be a statue, immovable and unbreakable. At the front of the hall, seated on a raised dais, was Prince Kalen. He was dressed in the crimson and gold of the royal house, his silver eyes gleaming in the candlelight. He looked every inch the future king, commanding and composed. But when his gaze met Alara's, she saw something else. A flicker of warmth, of connection. He was her ally, her partner in this endeavor, and she was grateful for his presence. Beside him sat the king, a frail figure who had been fading for years, his authority passed to his eldest son in all but name. And at the center of the hall, chained and guarded, stood the three architects of Alara's destruction. Lord Aldrich Vance was a broken man. His fine clothes were rumpled, his silver-streaked beard unkempt, his eyes hollow with defeat. He had been caught trying to flee the kingdom, his escape foiled by the crown prince's agents. Now, he stood in chains, a shadow of the man who had once commanded her obedience and her fear. Beside him, Lillian was pale and trembling, her dark hair tangled, her gown torn. She had been in custody for 3 days, stripped of her servants and her comforts, forced to confront the consequences of her actions. She looked up as Alara approached, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading light. "Alara, please," she whispered. "Please, I beg you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Forgive me." Alara looked at her sister, at the tears streaming down her cheeks, at the quiver of her lips, and felt nothing. No pity, no guilt, no remnants of the love she had once felt. All she felt was a cold, clear certainty. "You do not deserve forgiveness, Lillian," she said, her voice steady and calm. "You deserve justice. And justice will be served." She turned away, her heart untouched by her sister's pleas. She had spent too many years being manipulated by those tears, those hollow words. She was immune to them now. Lord Cedric was the last to be brought forward. He was no longer the handsome, commanding figure she had once loved. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild, his hands shaking as he was led to the center of the hall. He looked at Alara, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Regret, shame, it did not matter. It was too little, too late. "Alara," he said, his voice rasping. "I loved you. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Loved me?" Alara repeated, her voice flat. You used me, Cedric. You took everything I had and threw me away when I was no longer useful. You watched me die, and you did nothing. Do not pretend to love me now. It is an insult to everything I have survived." The trial proceeded with the swift, inexorable logic of a machine. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. Lillian's confession, wrung from her in exchange for immunity, sealed her father's fate. Lord Aldrich Vance was convicted of treason, conspiracy, and the murder of his wife. He was sentenced to death, his body to be left to the crows as a warning to all who would betray the crown. Lord Cedric's sentence was almost as severe. He was stripped of his titles and lands, his fortune confiscated, his name erased from the records of the nobility. He was to be exiled, sent to the northern wall as a common soldier, to live out his days in obscurity and shame. And Lillian, the architect of so much suffering, was given a sentence that Alara had helped to craft.
She would not die.
Death was too easy, too merciful. Instead, she would be sent to a convent, a cold, remote place high in the mountains, where she would live out her days in silence and prayer. It was a prison of the soul, a punishment that would strip her of everything she valued. Alara watched as her family was led away, their protests echoing in the hall. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction. She felt a strange, hollow emptiness. The vengeance she had craved had been delivered, but it had not filled the void inside her. The pain of her mother's death, the horror of her own execution, the years of suffering and betrayal, none of it could be undone. All she could do was move forward, carrying the weight of her past with her. The prince descended from the dais and approached her, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he said softly. "The justice you sought has been delivered. Are you satisfied?" Alara looked at him, at the silver eyes that had seen so much, at the face that had become so familiar. "I am not satisfied," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am relieved. That is all." The prince nodded, as if he understood. "The road ahead will not be easy. The court is a treacherous place, and there are those who will see your victory as a threat. But you will not face it alone. I will be with you, every step of the way." Alara felt a surge of emotion, a warmth that cut through the cold armor she had built around her heart. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." The prince smiled, a genuine smile that softened the hard edges of his face. "You do not need to thank me, Alara. We are in this together, remember, you and I, against the world." They walked out of the great hall together, leaving the whispers and the stairs behind. The sun was high in the sky now, its warm light bathing the palace in gold. Alara paused at the top of the stairs and looked out over the city she had once called home. It was the same city, the same streets, the same towers and spires. But she was not the same. She had been broken and remade, forged in the fires of betrayal and reborn in the flames of vengeance. She reached up and touched the silver crescent moon brooch at her throat. It had been her mother's, a symbol of the Vance legacy. But she would not let that legacy define her. She would build something new, something better. She would be the woman her mother had wanted her to be, the woman she had always had the strength to become. "Your Highness," she said, turning to the prince. "There is something I need to do." He looked at her, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I need to go to the garden," she said. "The rose garden at the Vance estate. It was my mother's favorite place. I need to say goodbye." The prince nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I will take you there myself." They rode through the city together, the prince's carriage carrying them through the crowded streets. Alara watched the people go about their lives, their faces filled with the mundane concerns of daily existence. They had no idea what she had been through, no idea of the darkness she had overcome.
And she was grateful for that.
She did not want their pity. She wanted their respect, and she would earn it. The Vance estate was silent when they arrived. The servants had been dismissed, the windows shuttered, the gardens left to grow wild. Alara walked through the familiar halls, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She paused at the door to her mother's chambers, her hand resting on the cold wood, and felt a wave of grief wash over her. Then she walked to the garden, the prince following at a respectful distance. The rose bushes were in full bloom, their petals a riot of red and pink and white. The fountain in the center was still, its waters undisturbed. Alara stood at the edge of the fountain, her eyes closed, and let the silence wash over her. "I'm sorry, mother," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry I could not save you. I'm sorry I was not strong enough. But I promise you this. I will live. I will find happiness. I will build a future worthy of you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single, dried rose petal. It was the last petal from her mother's favorite rosebush, the one she had picked on the day of the funeral. She had kept it all these years, a reminder of the love she had lost. She let it fall into the fountain, watching as it drifted on the surface of the water. The prince stepped up beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Alara looked at him, at the face that had become her anchor in this storm-tossed world. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I am ready." They walked back to the carriage together, leaving the garden and the ghosts of the past behind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Alara looked up at the horizon and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope that she was no longer the girl who had died on the northern wall. She was no longer the pawn of her family's schemes. She was Alara Vance, the woman who had risen from the ashes, and she was ready to claim her future. The carriage pulled away from the estate, the wheels crunching on the gravel. Alara leaned her head against the prince's shoulder, her eyes closing. She was tired, but it was a good tired, the tiredness of a battle won, of a war ended. "Kaelin," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "What happens now?" The prince looked down at her, his silver eyes filled with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "Now," he said, "we live. We build a new world, you and I. A world where justice is not a dream, but a reality. A world where love is not a weakness, but a strength. And we do it together." Alara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Together," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." The carriage disappeared into the gathering dusk, carrying them toward the future. Behind them, the Vance estate stood silent and empty, its secrets buried in the earth. And in the garden, the fountain whispered its secrets to the wind, a promise of new life, new beginnings. Alara Vance had survived. She had risen from the ashes, and she would never fall again.